Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Post Post-Race Debrief. This is Ananya, and I have Niharika and Ed with me, two journalists and one fan. Yeah, this is going to be a fun episode. And we are recording after the Monaco Grand Prix, which means we're going to cover Imola as well as Monaco. And the reason why we combined both of them together is one, because absolutely nothing happened in both of them. And the second is because we actually did record the Imola version, but we lost it because Niharika has fabulous internet in Faenza, and it meant that we had to ditch the episode. So it doesn't really look like we've lost much because there was barely anything that went on in Imola. And just continuing that trend, we had a crime fest in Monaco where we had one lap of racing action, and the rest of it was just, what were you guys doing during Monaco? Niharika, don't answer that because I know you were watching the race and you had to watch the race. Ed, you're like me. What were you doing?
I was getting a beer and watching the race. I think I had lunch. I think I had a cup of coffee. Yeah, I had all sorts. I was even on the
And
I was
even
on the
I was like fetching coffee all the time.
I was drinking like
I
lattes, whatnot. So
I was watching IPL. Actually, I was toggling between the channels because I was like, yeah, there's nothing much happening anyway. Might as well watch Sunrisers Hyderabad try to win something, but they didn't. So fantastic weekend. But that brings us to the point really is should Imola and Monaco stay on the calendar? What do you guys think?
You want to start with Ed?
I'll go first.
Yeah, let's go with Ed.
So Imola, no, because there is a real problem in the fact that yes, it's a great qualifying circuit, but in the race it's completely boring. There's barely any place to overtake. The cars are too wide to pass anyway. And if you try for a move, let's say into like Ravazza or Variante Alta, you're probably going to end up in the barrier or causing a plane crash. So I really don't see the point in having two races in Italy. I really don't see, like, it's a great circuit, but it's not raceable. With Monaco, I think you can make adjustments to it in the fact that, yes, the circuit is hideously boring at times, and these cars do have the issue of being too wide as well. That's the other problem. But you could make alterations to it in the fact that you could get rid of the Nouvelle chicane and make it flat out and much more of an overtaking opportunity, rather than keeping it as it is. I think the other thing that probably caused Monaco to be so boring was the red flag regulations, because everyone could do 77 lap stints on hards, and that made the race so hideously boring that the track somehow got the blame for it. So yeah, Imola can go, Monaco we can make adjustments.
Niharika, you?
Yeah, I'd agree there. But yeah, in Imola it was just more processionist than you saw now. But Imola, if you had two more laps of racing, you would have actually had Lando Norris win the race. So Imola had that. In Monaco, we didn't even have that. Monaco, like George, I think, suggested that we should have that entire race on softs, and it should be mandatory 2 pit stops, or the one.
Mandatory 2 pit stops.
Yeah, or mandatory and extra pit stop. Because in Monaco, they can't widen the road, they can't make bigger roads, but they can tweak around the format to still keep Monaco's iconic whatever and keep it on the grid. When it comes to Imola, now I don't know how much of the track layout, if you have to change the track, there's more room in Imola to change it up a bit. But again, like these cars are too wide, they're too heavy, and they aren't able to produce great racing at majority of the circuits. Like even Imola, if you count the number of overtakes, it's slightly more than Monaco, but not really exceptional.
Not really. What did we had something like 8 or 10 overtakes over 2 weekends. Is that right?
And Indy had how many?
600.
650-ish.
There you go. And
But
Formula One was about the racing. It can't just become a spectacle without racing being a part of it. That's integral to its identity.
exactly, and it seems like a Formula One problem more than a circuit problem, to be honest, because even WEC had real good racing in Imola, and then you come to Formula One and it's just
Yeah, and I
Great
mean, you look
races.
at Formula E, for all the flack that FE gets for being electric, there's no noise in the cars and all of that. They still, you can watch an FE race without taking your eyes off the screen. In Imola, I can list you quite a bit I was doing during the race, and which was not looking at the screen. The same with Monaco. I must have just run to the coffee machine for coffee. We had the red flag at lap 1, so that was a bit interesting, trying and seeing, what was being investigated where. But then that free pit stop just ruins the window that you had for cars jumping other cars in the pits and changing the racing outcome. But then again, whether it's Ferrari that wins or Red Bull that wins, there should be some fight for the win. It can't be one. It can't be one of those races that is 100% on a Saturday, and the top 10 order did not change from Saturday to Sunday. That's the worst part. At least you have racing far back down, say in Imola or whatever. You still have those teams fighting for points. But you don't have that even in Monaco. And in Monaco, it was a bit odd. I mean, the only overtakes that were made were Bottas and Joe, and that was that. It wasn't very interesting.
The problem with like Imola and trying to improve it is if you make changes, you potentially ruin the spectacle of what it is over qualifying. Like qualifying at Imola is fantastic because the drivers are constantly on the edge. You make any changes to improve the racing, the racing might be slightly better, but the problem is the challenge of the circuit suffers, and people will be like, well, we don't need to go there. It's just another boring tilt dome, as the usual excuse gets thrown around. The issue with Imola is the fact that there's the Santoro River behind Tamburello and also Villeneuve, which is why you can't make any changes to that corner, and also because of historical reasons, as most people know. So there's limited areas where you can really improve with Imola. With Monaco, there is, you can make a few changes, even if it is, as Naharika said, you have to do the format, which I think is doable. You can even make changes to qualifying, even make it grouped qualifying if you wish. But just something to spice it up and make it unique, which is what F1 fear. It's not Monaco is anymore, in the fact that it's not unique enough.
So essentially, what you might be suggesting is something like take a Grand Slam approach, but for Formula One, where just make it slightly unique, as and when the races kind of get boring. And you know that historical circuits like Monaco do produce really boring races, but they're historical, and you need to preserve that sort of history of the sport. So you need to keep it on, and there's no way that it's getting off.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, like Imola, there was also another factor that played in, which was the weather. It was supposed to rain on race day, and that forecast moved to Sunday. And the same happened with Monaco. Monaco was supposed to be a wet race weekend, and then it became really hot, and that weather moved. So, I mean, the weather gods are something you're not going to be able to predict the weather, but even without that weather window, coming to spice things up, F1 has to find a way in its format or in its entirety with the cars or something of that sort to make it more raceable, to make these tracks more race-worthy. And that's not happening. So they're going to have to, I agree with Ed, but even the suggestions Ed gave, these are artificial tweaks. The real problem is the cars. And I don't know how you're going to do that.
Honestly, I do.
Fair point. But speaking about the action that...
Sorry, quickly. I was going to.
I'm sorry, Ed.
I was going to quickly.
No, finish it up.
My side. The cars are, as we've said, the cars are too wide. They're too clunky. They're not agile enough. The problem is with Monaco, for example, driving one of these things around. It's not a pleasure. It's a chore. It's like driving a tractor because they're so heavy and so wide. You make one little slight correction to left, like you would in, let's say, a lighter mid 2000s car. Chances are you're in the wall. So there needs to be something about shortening these cars up without, potentially heightening the risk of danger to the drivers in an accident.
Fair point. But just coming back to action that we did see happen, I think I want to touch upon the fact that the Imola race, I think what we saw was, yes, Red Bull ended up winning the race, but the way that McLaren were able to close in on the Red Bull towards the end of the race, and leave the fact that he was on better tires, and but obviously better tires means better traction and so on, but they did have the pace throughout the race. And Niharika, I remember you mentioning the last episode that we shot that McLaren would be there because they are catching up to Red Bull at a rapid pace and that Red Bull might be plateauing at some point. So do you think that now that we're done with Monaco and we've got a new winner on board, that we are reaching that cliff
Yes,
very
because
soon?
I've spoken to enough of people, and when we saw in Imola, is Max was actually had to work for that one. Even his lap in Imola is qualifying in Monaco. He's had to work for it. There is something with that car that is not working, but I'll come to that later. Another factor that played, like Max, if you saw his first 20 laps, he had 3 strikes for violating track limits. So you know he was pushing that car like anything. If that race were 5 laps longer, Lando would have had him. And Imola was a very McLaren. When it comes to track sequencing, which track suits what car, Imola was McLaren's deal, not Ferrari and Red Bull's. And it was more of Max pulling it out of the car than Red Bull itself. And then where I come to my second point, where what's happening to Red Bull. Well, I spoke to Max and I tried to ask him precisely what he said. I mean, what he thinks of it, what the weakness is. And the scary part is they don't know what the weakness is. So they had Sebastian Buemi fix that problem and make it a little drivable on the simulator in Monaco, in Imola. But in Monaco, they didn't have their sim drivers available. JQs and Buemi were in FE in Shanghai, and they didn't have anyone at the simulator available to kind of tweak that problem. And even otherwise, I think that car has a serious problem. It has a weakness that probably they were so dominant in the past that it was not evident. And now with the teams closing up, the flaws have started to show up. And we had the same pattern in the Mercedes era, where the rake levels was too low and Red Bull and Ferrari would have extremely high rake levels and make it up there. So we saw a similar pattern flow, say in the Mercedes years of dominance, where the dominance, when you start to have a challenge, then when it comes down to fine margins and tenths, you have these weaknesses kind of expose themselves. And as so far, Red Bull doesn't know what that problem is. They just know that there are going to be tracks up next where some will suit them and some are not going to suit them. And this time, instead of one team capitalizing on that, you're going to have 2. So it's just thrown the championship wide open.
Yeah, I would.
Ed, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think with Imola, I think it was Verstappen's victory, it was not Red Bull's. As Niharika said, he was really thrashing the car around. And it was a champion's drive. The way he made up so much time in qualifying was incredible. And the race, he would have been caught by Lando, but the checker flag came in time. So Verstappen is the one who's keeping Red Bull foibles out of the limelight. But in Monaco, it got properly exposed because they were nowhere. And I thought, okay, well, practice they're probably a bit sandbagging and then qualifying they'll come back. They were just nowhere. And it's always the second sector of a track where they struggle with. Same problem at Imola, same problem at Monaco. There is something seriously wrong with that car and the fact that it's just not clicking. The RB18, when it got properly developed, it was like a rocket ship. You couldn't beat it. RB19, same thing. This one, it's a bit tricky. And it's very peaky in the fact that one weekend it's very dominant, and one weekend it's nowhere. So Red Bull are in a bit of bother, and the fact that Ferrari have got 2 wins on the board now, McLaren are thereabouts, they have to keep the game up because that team is currently in a bit of chaos off track. So on track, the product is kind of slipped a little bit, I think, from a personal point of view. So Montreal and Barcelona are going to be a real turning point for the championship on how is it going to go. If Red Bull lose, then I can seriously see, a 2-way, maybe 3-way title fight.
I think you brought up a good point there. All the teams that's going with...
One of the weaknesses that Ed was talking about, I think so, that it is the ride height. Red Bull sits extremely low compared to the other cars. If you look at it, and their ride height is really low. So when you have tracks with bumpy surface and, a different asphalt, they tend to struggle. The gap between them and Ferrari or them and McLaren or the car that's behind them really reduces. And then you have Max pulling out the best of it and driving around the limitations of the car. But Checo is unable to do that. Therefore, the P6 and the P18. And maybe Checo could have been a bit further up in Monaco, But I mean, the gaps started to widen, and I think I predicted that in the previous episodes too. So.
I do agree with you on the ride height bit, but just to like, touch upon what Ed said before as well, I think Red Bull are in a bit of a soup right now with respect to Adrian moving out and then what's happening with Christian Horner and all of that. And now Max is, kind of doubting whether I don't know if this is true, but we did discuss this, Niharika, in our first episode, that, you could potentially see that Max is on a bit of an unstable ground right now because he doesn't know whether this is the right project to put all your money in. So could that be the reason? I know it's a far shot, but could that potentially be a reason why Red Bull is not probably able to concentrate on what is happening currently on track?
No. I think every car you design, it's not going to be flawless. You iron the flaws out over the course of 2 or 3 races. And it's not like Red Bull won't have it sorted. See, the reason Red Bull also dominated was because the others weren't leveling up. Mercedes and Ferrari hadn't designed cars that were good enough. McLaren turned it around last year, so they came into the fight. But we were expecting these cars to converge at some point. But if Max has to take a decision for its future, it's going to be less chassis related and more engine related, because the next regs or the next regulation overhaul you have is who designs the better engine. And it's whether RBPT can come up with something good, whether Mercedes can come up with a better engine, or Ferrari has always been a decent engine maker, so Ferrari can come up with one. So he needs to know where he will be in a pecking order and with what team, whether Aston Martin can offer that to him, because they're going to make their own engine with Honda there. And he's already driven Honda engines and won with it. So Honda did do a good job with Red Bull and AlphaTauri in 2020 and 21. They were at least better than a Renault. And that's going to be a very interesting thing to see, because that decision will be driven by the engine rules and not by what happens now. Now the problem is probably their second driver, who they have there, where the championship fight is thrown open. And I think I mentioned this in the first episode. The question is going to be, when he has 4 cars breathing down his throat, whether Checo will really save the day, and that will decide his contract for next year, not the current talks that they're happening.
I will also point out the fact that RBT are going in with a new partnership with Ford. Now, new engines are very manufacturers. They are teething problems. Take example McLaren when they went with Peugeot. Peugeot had won everything at Le Mans. They came into Formula One thinking we could challenge Renault, and what happened? Half the time the engine exploded into a billion pieces. So Max may be concerned that the Ford engine project might not be particularly good. And the fact is, Honda have proven time and time again they're the best engine manufacturer. That's the key element behind, in my eyes, along with Newey and Verstappen, of Red Bull's success. The Honda engine turned up and got better and better as the years went on. Losing that Honda engine and potentially going to an unknown project in Ford, we don't know about the dyno results. We don't know how they're going to start really putting this engine into practice. That could be, tinkering in his mind, thinking, am I really wanting to work with a project which may force me to have a year where I don't fight for any wins or championships? And also Perez is a concern because recent form has been pretty bad. I think ever since Japan, his form has been completely terrible. At Monaco, I know he got taken out at the start. He shouldn't have been there. Out in Q1 it's unacceptable for a driver at his level, particularly someone who's won there previously. So he must have lots of other thoughts going around his head, thinking, is this really going to be the right project for me in 5 or 6 years' time when I'm entering the prime of my racing career, or even the twilights, if Max does decide, I'll go and do something else by the time I'm 30, 31.
And when it comes to Perez, I really feel like last year when they renewed his contract, they bought Daniel back in the AlphaTauri. But Red Bull really didn't have any options in their pool who were ready to replace Perez. So again, he got that 1-year extension. And talking of Perez, it tends to happen that when Max finds his form, he takes time to adjust and he finds his form. But then initially the first tracks in the F1 calendar somehow suit Perez. So he manages looking decent. But then he again trails off. When it comes to Europe and the more technical tracks, you'll see Perez is nowhere. And this time Red Bull have a lot of options gunning for that drive, for next year's drive, inside and outside that pool. And it's just a matter of waiting it out to a certain extent. And even if Perez say renews his contract, I don't think it'll be for more than a year's extension. I think what is happening is Red Bull want to give him a 1 year because they're spoiled for choice with drivers, and he wants 2 years and they don't want to commit there.
No.
So that's the negotiation, and if his form drops side by side, I don't think he has a sticking point or that leverage to say, I'm better. I'm good enough to be there.
The only way he'll get a 2-year contract is if they put it a performance clause where they say, okay, if you're near max, you may get a second year. But at the end of the day, Checo is not exactly a spring chicken anymore. He's in his mid to late 30s. How long has he really got? And you've got all these other talents.
Yeah, and what if Max doesn't stay at Red Bull next year? That's still the undercurrent. There's some people who still think Max might leave to Mercedes. So that's really odd. And then looking at Kimi Antonelli's season in F2, is he really that special?
Let's before we jump to Kimi, because I think Kimi's subject opens up a whole other ballgame, because now you've got Ollie Bearman also in the picture, right? And that's an exciting one. But just to like wrap up this Checo thing, now the word is that he's going to get a 1-year extension. But just in your opinion, both of you, do you think he deserves that 1 year? And even if he does take it, is that a seat wasted?
I feel so. Because this is the furthest Checo could get. He's a strong driver, a strong midfield driver, but you can't rely on him when it comes to, say he's good at defense and what he pulled off in Abu Dhabi, and maybe, but he's not going to be their second, finishing second in the championship last year was also hard enough for him.
Yeah.
So he did finish P2.
He barely hung on to that.
He barely hung on to it. And he just about hung on to it. So he's one of those drivers that opens up a gap in the team points, and that doesn't help the constructors if you have about 4 drivers gunning at your man or your lead man. So I feel that's not just waste of a drive, but they can really bring in somebody there to do much better.
Ed, who would you like to see?
I would be in the agreement with Naharika. I think it is starting to become a bit of a wasted seat. Checo was once upon a time a very solid, dependable number 2. I mean, he helped Max win the title in 2021 through his... yeah, he is. That's why he did Force India and Racing Point. That's what he was so good at. But the problem is, every time he consistently screws up qualifying, every time he consistently underwhelms in the race, he's just adding more and more, giving more and more ammunition to his critics. Personally, I think you've got Tsunoda available. Why don't you give him a try? Because at the end of the day, he does not. He's too good to be at a Haas. He's too good to be in the lower midfield. Give him a go. See what he's like, and then if not, you can have a look at other options around. Yeah. There's also the fact that if Mercedes do decide to get rid of George Russell, if Yuki doesn't perform, you can slot George in. Maybe even that's a possibility and a half. So yeah, I think Checo is really on borrowed time, unless he starts channeling the performances which got him that drive. So he really needs to up his game to get a 1 year, to get even a 2-year deal. 1 year might be the bare minimum.
Yeah, and the chatter surrounding him, where the British media and European media is saying, oh, that contract's going to get signed anyway. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think Red Bull are going to sign it anytime before summer break. Because Christian Horner said we're still at the 8th race or something like that. So they do have a lot of plans, at least from Peter Bayer, Christian Horner, and everybody's talk. Even Helmut has reserved his judgments over a lot of drivers doing well and not doing well. So I do think Red Bull is going to take its sweet time, and they should, because that drive is a very important drive. And I always felt that maybe a Nico Hülkenberg was a better choice for that seat in 2020 than Checo. I was of that opinion back then, because Nico did not have that podium thing on his resume, but Red Bull could have kind of given him that anyway. That was the only albatross in his neck that he had to toss out. When it came to strong driving, Nico would have been closer to Max in terms of lap time as Checo is. For Checo it's becoming a task. He has to outdrive himself, or he ends up overdriving the car, and it's really a big effort from him. And it's really, I don't see him going on like this. And there are a lot of options there that they have this time, and they will take time to. I don't think they're going to be foolish enough to announce it around Canada and Spain or Silverstone. I think you'll get a decision around Hungary or Belgium, and so that's going to be that.
But you had touched upon the subject before. Now let's go to Mercedes and what's currently happening within the team right now, because Ed and I were just speaking before. Hamilton's on this abysmal qualifying run, and then you've got him coming out to the press and saying that, hey, you know what, I'm not going to be anywhere close to this guy for the rest of the year. And then he just leaves it at that. So clearly there seems to be something that these guys are playing around with internally that we don't know, but you can see in performances and you can see the gap between the two of them. So is that more of like Hamilton's just written off the season because obviously he's no longer a Mercedes driver, or is there seriously some sort of meddling going on?
I'll tell you what happened. Listen to his voice notes. Post Friday, it's like the best weekend of the. This is where it'll turn around for him. And then you have qualifying on Saturday, and he literally botched it. I think it was around Q2 where it didn't work, or Q3 it went away from him, because he was fastest in all 3 practice sessions, and he came out saying, yeah, this is my weekend, I finally have a chance, and all of that. So I mean, Lewis in the media, it's like when he's done well, you'll get a 3-minute sound audio bite, and if he hasn't done well, you can fit all his quotes into one story, because it'll be a 1-minute 30-second audio file or something like that. So he did come into the weekend wanting to turn it around. He's been successful around Monaco and all of that. But I don't think there's something internally going on in Mercedes. Lewis knows that better because Toto is a friend of his. And Toto won't do that injustice with both the drivers, at least not with Hamilton. And I don't think Hamilton's written it off, but that was a way of getting the media off his back. I think it's that, because I was in front of him and it seemed more like that.
I think
Ed, I know you've had a chance to speak to him as well.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
You can tell when Lewis is in a good mood and a bad mood, as Naharika said. You'll get either if he's in a bad mood, he'll just go, yeah, maybe. And he'll mumble. He'll mumble
and
basically.
Need more than those headphones to be like, huh?
Yeah, but it'll be like a minute.
And he'll be right within a 2-meter distance and you won't hear him.
Yeah, or you could get a really good soundbite out of him for like 3 minutes. I think the way he is, I think he's a little bit looking at the future. He knows he has a job still to do. He still has a year. He's contracted and he's still paid to drive for Mercedes. The qualifying form is a bit surprising considering that Lewis is exceptionally good at qualifying. That's, you don't get so many poles by being bad at it. You get it because you're good. And I just think he's a little bit mentally checked out. I would say he seems a little bit mentally checked out, but that's normal when you're leaving an employers. You're looking to the future. So I think, it just seems like he's a bit like he's already looking ahead, but he is just not delivering it fully like everyone expects him to. And that's why George is getting a little bit ahead of him. So yeah, it's tricky with Lewis. I'm a bit puzzled as everyone else is, wondering why he is struggling, in one of his specialist areas.
Fair point.
Yeah, and I mean, but Lewis is going to have to pull up his socks at some point this season because Charles is back on his game. Carlos has started to trail off. And Charles had a few limitations, and I think that Monaco win is going to be a mental boost. And then when you have Hamilton coming as your teammate, Charles is going to go up the ante. He's going to want to beat him. But if Lewis starts giving performances that are not there, it'll actually start to raise questions with even Fred. Have I hired the right driver? Or have I just kept it the same? So those kind of questions are what Lewis doesn't want. And you will see him perform well. This is just a carry through to the media and nothing else. I wouldn't read much into whatever he said. But nothing else apart from that. I saw him like in 2012, in 2013 was going to be his year with Mercedes, but Lewis actually won the US Grand Prix. Jensen and him were teammates at McLaren. It didn't stop him from performing in the last year. He didn't come out saying, oh, the guys, team's favoring Jensen or something like that. It's just all media talk. It is what it is. But There's not much to read into it. There's nothing unfair happening with him and the team. This is a team where the team boss is a friend of his. Yeah.
I would just quickly agree. I don't see them just favouring George. I think the idea that they're giving George preferential treatment is cobblers. In my humble opinion, I think just Lewis has had a bit of a tough patch, which every driver has. That's the thing. Every driver has that period of form where nothing is clicking, or in their specialist areas, they're just not delivering. But yeah, Fred will want to have a keep an eye on it because he has a very top-rated junior waiting in the wings in Ollie Bearman, who he could maybe even parachute for a cheap option. So Lewis needs to start to find that form which made him what he was in the great champion he is, and also for the fact that in 22 and 23 he was able to drag two very mediocre Mercedes cars to consistent amounts of podiums and the odd pole position there and then.
Look, it's not going to happen to Max. It's happened to Fernando. It's happened to other drivers. They do reach a slump, and Max will too, and so will many other drivers. It's how you get out of that slump that really matters, and are you really going to turn it around or just write off a season? So that's where it comes in, and then obviously there's the Antonelli subject with Mercedes.
Yeah, exactly. Not just Antonelli, because now you have Ollie Bearman in the picture as well, and he's been linked to multiple teams. Are we too early in the season to talk about Antonelli and Bearman potentially getting a mid-season drive, or not maybe a mid-season drive with Antonelli, but Bearman?
See, Antonelli is coming from F3 Open to F2. That's a big jump in your single-seater career.
I think he skipped F3.
Yeah,
Didn't he skip F3?
Frecker.
He's come from F3 region. Frecker.
Yeah.
You've skipped about a step or two as it is. So the Mercedes problem is they actually have to vacate probably a Williams seat or someone else to test him in these cars, because although he had an exceptional test and metronomious test according to James Vowles in Imola and Silverstone and Austria, I believe, but that was the benchmark when he drove the W13. The benchmark was Mick Schumacher. So I'm sure they want more than that to judge him, and not a reserve driver or a driver who's not driving. They want more than that to test him. And then there's one option where there's Logan Sargent. FIA did receive a request to replace him. So one is whether he goes mid-season and replaces Logan and gets half a season with Williams to see whether he's there, and then Mercedes weigh their choices. Or you evaluate his whole F2 season, and this F2 season seems like it's going to go a bit up and down. So any early decision has to be done with all fairity, whether it's Bearman or Antonelli. They're going to have their good weekends and bad weekends. So I feel like I've made this point before on your podcast. What about Dragovic? Why aren't we all talking about him? Isn't he in line? He's an F2 champion without a drive.
Ed, why are we not talking about
Dragovic? They seem to
Dragovic?
be good enough. Nobody talks about Dragovic. Nobody's talking about the other drivers. But then that happens when you're non-European, non-Brit. But that point we've discussed earlier, so I don't want to get onto that again. But yeah, I feel Antonelli will, if they don't get a Williams drive and Lewis carries on like this, then, or if Lewis feels like writing a season off, then maybe Toto, it opens up the option for Toto bringing Antonelli directly to pitch him against George for half a season.
Yeah,
Ed, what do you think?
I think personally we need to give them a little bit more time, particularly with Antonelli, bearing in mind that he's only into a number of weekends at F2, and it's a massive step going from a Frecker car to an F2 car. It's a totally different kettle of fish.
Yeah, and you have to be fair to them too.
Yeah. I mean,
I feel you have to be fair to them too. They're young teens, and you're putting so much of hype, so much of pressure on them. You got to be fair to them and give them that, room to adjust, and not, where you suspend the judgment for a few races and then see where they play in the market.
Yeah, the problem is for Bearman as well. He missed a race. For Bearman, the problem is he missed a race in Jeddah, and that would have been an easy 25 points. We wouldn't be talking about Bearman struggling in the F2 Championship if it weren't the case. The problem is with them both at the moment, they're in a team which is underperforming in Prema. Prema have not hit the ground running with that car. So they're both in the weeds a little bit. With Antonelli, it's a case of, I don't see the point of rushing him in just for the sake of it. At the end of the day, it's not going to work if he's not ready. maybe you could run him in a few FP1s and maybe tell Lewis, okay, you're leaving. We want you out the car for FP1. Give Kimi enough time to see where he is compared to George. You don't miss a race. We don't lose sponsorship money off it. A presto. The other issue is with Williams is there's rumours going around that Valtteri's going to go there, but everyone is seemingly at the point where they know that Logan is 50% out of the door and basically on the one-way ticket out of F1. Do you bench him? Like, what do you do? I mean, Antonelli might not be any better, and it might add just an unnecessary amount of pressure. With Bearman, I think it's a case that they have to wait for K-Mag to get banned. If K-Mag gets banned, easy. Bearman gets a seat. But at the end of the day, it's going to affect his F2 commitments. So I wouldn't put too much pressure on them to instantly jump into F1. They need their time. Every young driver needs their time. But just quickly adding on to Drugovich, I unfortunately... Go on. Yeah, go.
Yeah, if you look at it, even Tsunoda and Max, they jumped them straight after F2, Max without that. But look at the time it's taken them to find their form. It took even Max that long, but Max was exceptional. He was driving at a very high level. He was testing junior cars at a very, very young age. But it still took him time to, iron out the flaws in his driving. There were a whole set of rules brought in. So that they were called the Verstappen rules or the pink rules. I mean, many journalists who were there in that season will remember this. The race director, Charlie Whiting, had actually drafted an entire set of rules. The rules of engagement had changed because of the GP2 style of driving due to Max and many other drivers. And there were also all kinds of tricks that were not allowed anymore in this sport. And if you actually go back to that time and look at the whole race director's notes, it wasn't easy for Max. His whole scrutiny happened on the world stage. And you're going to resort these youngsters to that, then give them a fair chance. I mean, Max was exceptional. Yuki, again, almost got written off because Gasly was his teammate. But then Yuki was good in F2. It wasn't a bad talent. But then you're going to get, again, two more like that. And these ground effect cars are not easy to drive for a rookie. You can't jump the gun with that.
No.
But here's the thing. I have a slightly different opinion on this. I think, one, they are very young right now, right? Skipping F3 to do F2 and then skipping half a season to do F1, I think that's nonsense. I think you are going to kill talent very quickly. But on the flip side, if you don't catch them young enough, then you're going to risk not finding the next Max Verstappen, because I think everybody here believes that Kimi is the next Max Verstappen or the next Schumacher or the next, every big champion that you can think of.
But why just Max? It happened once. It might not happen again. Here's my point. And there's been a Lewis who was one of the most well-prepared rookies to ever come into Formula One. He was picked up at the karting stage, but you have to pick them up and develop them. So let them develop, is what one would want to say.
Fair enough.
And you have that talent. It's just a matter of giving them the right break at the right time. You aren't firing Antonelli as a Mercedes driver. You aren't firing Bearman as a Mercedes driver. They'll always be in the wings. But what's the hurry? Is the question mark. And they have to be well prepared enough to make their cut.
And also, just quickly, giving them too much hype early on in his career. The other thing that really wrecked Tsunoda's confidence early on was after Bahrain, where he had that great opening race. Everyone said how wonderful he was and how great of a rookie he was. And the next few races, he was completely awful. He plateaued. So there's putting too much pressure on too early, which is what you cannot do with these two kids. I mean, Bearman, we know how well he did in Jeddah, but you can't expect him to do it instantly in a car which is not as quick as a Ferrari. Same with Antonelli. Antonelli, in hindsight, you could probably say he should be in F3 by now, learning his trade and, picking up little tips on the tracks that F1 races at. So you can't put too much pressure on them too early after one or two good performances as well. That's the other thing. Just quickly on Drugovich, you touched on it, Naharika. I think that ship has unfortunately sailed a little bit because he's now more or less doing sports car racing, and it seems like his future is definitely going to be in WEC and IMSA, which is a shame because he is very, very talented. And that Bahrain test, if it weren't for Stroll getting fit, healing up so quickly, who's to say he wouldn't have had a good race in Bahrain and probably could have landed himself a drive in 2024, maybe. Who knows?
Possible. But now that we have spoken about Drugovich, I quickly want to touch upon what's happening at Aston Martin. things haven't really gone their way the past two races, and I don't know how things are really going to go their way at all for the rest of the season. But everybody was on the Alonso hype train, and they have been since the past 1 year. I would say the second half of last year kind of trailed off, but people have picked it back up again. But I want to know what is happening at Aston and where do you think they're going? And is there any hope for this team this year?
See, what Aston's trying to do is they're trying to design a car around a Mercedes suspension. And that's where it's not working for them. You have Fallows there, who they took from Red Bull. So you have the right pool of talent. And Lawrence is right to be frustrated because he's given him everything. He's given him the infrastructure, everything. But then you're trying to design a car around a Mercedes suspension, and that's not going to work. In McLaren's case, McLaren make their own suspensions. So McLaren actually play around with a lot more and can come up with a concept that works. And I think what happened in Imola and Monaco is they've brought in these upgrades and not expected them to deliver, but those tracks are also tracks where you won't see them deliver. They are kind of processionesque circuits. So I think where you will see them work or not work is probably Montreal and Spain, and they get more upgrades, I think, around Montreal and Spain. So you're going to have a lot of that. Like Fernando said, they are getting upgrades in Canada or Spain, I think. And that's what's happening at Aston. And then the other thing is, yes, you have Honda going there. So you don't know whether the Strolls are going to stick in the sport, pull out. There's rumors of Aramco maybe. We've always heard the Saudi rumor with Aston. So that's one. But the major news is Binotto is being linked with Aston as a the technical director. The latest has been that, like Mattia Binotto might just join Aston Martin. So that's been interesting. But I mean, if you look at the journey of that team, I have seen it as Force India, and I see it now. It's literally a matter of pride, the way it's come along. And it's a lovely pool of people. They're just struggling to get it together. And I think when it comes to car design, that suspension bit, using that Mercedes-Benz suspension is really not working for them. That's my personal overview of that. And yeah, Ed can probably add in more.
Yeah, I think for me there's teething problems, of course. It's a new transition. They've got to move from the old facility to the new one. And it's much bigger than the old one based at the old factory. But there are rumours going around that Lawrence is having sleepless nights over the performance. And to be honest, I don't blame him. He's got a big Honda work still coming in 2026. He needs to get results now. The AMR 24's big problem is the fact that it just doesn't seem to click on these, bumpy circuits as previously seen. But also for the fact is, that, as with the rear suspension issue, there also is a feeling that, you have to wonder, have they got two drivers who can help that team move up? They've got one very good one in Alonso. The second one, Stroll, not sure about, because Stroll has his peaks. Like he drove pretty well, and I think it was in Imola he drove very well. But then in some races he drove.
But then he had the tyre offset. He had an alternate tyre strategy.
Yeah, which is a problem. Which is the other thing. And then you see stuff he does in Shanghai, and you wonder, should this guy even be on the grid? Realistically, Aston Martin need two drivers who can really fight for at least P4. The other feeling I have is, the idea that this is a bit of a pet project for Lance, is that keeping the shareholders happy? Probably not, no. My prediction is that Honda will probably buy that team out at some point and make it into a Honda Works team and put Yuki as the face of it. That would be my prediction. Honda want to stay in F1, but there's a feeling for me that they've probably got unfinished business over a Works team because of what had happened with, between 06 and 08. So I think it's also there's a worry of lack of time, which is probably seeping into Aston Martin at the moment.
I think so, because I remember in 2021 when Seb came into Aston Martin, it was rebranded as Aston Martin 21. He said that Lawrence had a 5-year plan. We're on year 4, and this team is still. They've moved from the back of the grid to the midfield now. They were somewhere in the top 3 last year, but then they fell back. So I think you're kind of right. I think they are running out of time, and they are looking for alternate options, whether that's a complete buyout or it is a complete rebrand again as a Honda Works team, possibly as Aramco as the
Yeah,
title.
I feel the Honda bit,
Yeah.
I think we had spoken about this on the Imola, this thing. I feel Honda is going to
Yeah.
buy into them. And then you also have, if you just have one driver as your reference point to develop a car, you need two at times. And that's not happening with them. They aren't able to find that performance reference point on the grid with the performances, because one clearly doesn't have a mind at it, and the other one knows how to do nothing but how to race. So yeah, I do hear that. And yeah, we've had a lot of, see, whenever Briatore enters the paddock, and he was there in Imola and in Monaco, whenever Briatore comes in, there are a lot of fireworks happening, like the media getting to know stuff happening in Aston and all of that. And I believe, yes, Stroll is not happy with the way it's going around at the moment. The upgrades they've got, I think, from clinching podiums last year with Fernando to where they are now, is not the position they want to be in, because now you're back to where Force India used to be, is a midfield team. And you were almost there to challenge a McLaren. And I think you saw that trail off second half of last season, where even Lando gave us a joke like, we bring an upgrade and we get further and further on the grid, and they're bringing upgrades and they're getting worse and worse on the grid. So yeah, Lando had joked about that last year in the press conference. And,
I think you called it a downgrade. It is a
downgrade.
downgrade.
Downgrade, yeah. So I think what they bought to Imola is a downgrade, in Lando's words or language. Yeah.
And I think you've given us the perfect segue to kind of talk about Flavio Briatore and Alpine. Always the favorite subject. Do you want to give us a bit more into this?
Yeah, so there's been rumours going around today that Flavio Briatore will be coming back to Alpine. Now, the team have not denied it, but they've not confirmed it. I mean, for me, it sounds like a Benetton tribute act, in the fact that they're going to be potentially hiring a Schumacher. They're going to have Briatore back. I mean, they just need Pat Simmons and Ross Brawn to come back, and hey presto, we have the band back together. But the problem is with Alpine at the moment, it seems like a team which is just coming back from what has been the worst start to the season it's had in yonks. They've got two warring drivers. You know, Ocon making. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay. It'll record on his back end. It's okay.
So do you want me to go from the top?
Yeah, you're back now. Yeah.
Do you want me to go from the top? So yeah, Briatore.
No, just. Yeah.
Okay. So they've got two warring drivers. You know, we can talk all day about Ocon's whatever that was into Portier on lap one. And you've got the fact that there's a lot of people swimming around that team looking to buy it. So Briatore coming back to try and recruit people is interesting. Although I read somewhere that Adrian Newey was potentially one of the targets, but I think a local F1 in schools team's target would be Adrian Newey, and they probably got the similar amount of chances. So I don't think Alpine. I think Alpine have got too many pies in the sky to chase.
Yeah, but what I can tell you about Alpine is that, if you look into it, the part we skipped was that the latest development with Alpine is Esteban Ocon. Ocon's driving, he's always had trouble with his teammates. Now, he has outperformed Gasly for 7 weekends until Gasly gets his first points in Monaco despite the chaos. But what Esteban pulls on his teammates, you've had Otmar getting fired out of that team because he couldn't get the rules of engagement right with that team. And this is not Esteban's first time. Esteban's always run into trouble with Checo, with Alonso. Name Esteban's teammate who he hasn't pulled a stunt on. And with Esteban, I think he pulled it on the lap 1 incident in Monaco, and it didn't get investigated. But further down Mirabao and around the tunnel, you saw him almost get Pierre to go airborne. And that was really unnecessary. It's your own teammate. And I don't know what he was trying to do there. And Bruno Famin has come out saying that no, there is going to be strict consequences to this. So I think what we are hearing is he could possibly get benched, and Doohan could probably drive one race. And Doohan's been sitting in the wings ready to replace either of those French drivers for a long time now. And I'm sure Doohan wants to do more than playing basketball, doing their PR, and eating acai bowls. Or how do you pronounce it? Acai bowls.
Acai bowls.
Acai bowls, yeah. And so I think Esteban's literally walking a very fine line with Alpine, and that is not. It might go awry with him because, like we've discussed in the first episode, I had said one of the Alpine drivers will go. I think I mentioned this before, and at the moment, for temporarily, it seemed like Esteban's really crossed the line.
Yeah.
Ed can talk about that.
Yeah, Esteban did cross the line, and the fact that Famin has talked about how he will, unleash consequences on the team. I think there's two reasons why he's doing that. Number one, to show that there's no one bigger than the team, and to say to him and Gasly, you do that again, you're going to be out. But also for the second reason is that Famin probably is looking at that team principal role on a more permanent basis, bearing in mind he has been a temporary... Oh, I've lost you. He's always been a temporary... He's always been a temporary team principal through the fact that Otmar got fired and he got drafted in. So he's looking at that team principal role and thinking, how can I get that on a permanent basis? How do I stamp down discipline on this team? And that's how he's trying to look at. Also, there's rumours going around that Esteban is looking around, shopping for Haas seats. There's rumours that he annoys people with the fact that he couldn't stop talking about how he was linked with Toto, which, I mean, driver talks with other teams, call the press, it's a breaking news story. I don't see why they would give Doohan a go, though, in Canada, because it's a track he doesn't know, for start. Secondly, that's not going to be a circuit where Alpine are going to get points, so he's going to be stuck in Q1. It seems like a bit of a baptism of fire, but at the end of the day, they want to evaluate drivers. So, on merit, do I think Ocon should have been banned for that move? I think he should have been given a sitting down and saying, you do that again, you're going to get bleep, 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 as F1 teams tend to do in more phrases than one. But is it worth a ban? Is it worth benching him for a guy who's untested?
For one race.
For one race. For one race.
Teach him a lesson. That's the one. That's what we're hearing. That he might
But
be
that's
benched
a bit of a...
to teach him a lesson.
Yeah.
No, but that's a very school childish move, isn't it?
Yeah, but isn't
a proper
F1 by now? There are a lot of high schoolish moves that happened in F1. It's like it happens with senior drivers. So F1 is a bit like high school in many ways. You do such stuff. You've had and I think Esteban and Gasly are not at the age of Lewis and Nico when they pulled some career-ending moves on each other and was schooled by Ross Brawn, Niki Lauda, and Toto Wolff. And they were well into their 30s when they were doing what they were doing. So it just happens in F1. It's not the first time we're seeing it. And I won't be surprised if that happens. But if it does happen, that the rumor suggests and speculation suggests Doohan will get a one-race drive or whatever.
Yeah.
The question I really have is, both of you mentioned it when you were talking about Alpine, is one, Ed, you said that this is on performance and F1 teams evaluate on performance. And Niharika, you did mention that, oh wow, I've lost my train of thought. Never mind. But the point is, that if you see entirely on merit, I remember what Niharika said. You said he has beaten Gasly for the past 7 races. And doesn't performance matter over anything else? Because this just seems like things that have happened between the both of them, and they've been reprimanded for that before. It's happened again, but taking a very childish move like, I'll just bench you for one race, it doesn't seem to do the trick. I don't think it'll do the trick.
Because I think the reason Ocon's doing it, because he thinks there are no consequences. It's happened before and it'll happen again. So this might be a way of telling him that, okay, if you think you're also out of contract by the end of the year, and if you think, from what I've heard, Gasly is liked more by that team than Esteban. And Esteban's been there for a long time. He's been through the Fernando phase. He's been Ricciardo's teammate in 2020 through the pandemic, or 2021. So that's been there. But then you don't have, Esteban, I think Gasly had a bad start to the year, and that started to turn around now. So, but then Esteban really doesn't need to pull this on his teammate. And this is like your second year. You probably understood the rules of engagement by now, that we're struggling to get this car into points, and the one time we do have a chance, where Gasly qualified well, he was in P10. So the strategy or whatever favors Pierre to a certain extent, if you look at it. That's the car that's ahead. And if he's getting one weekend right, you really don't have to do something like that when you've just had, like, I don't know. I mean, Esteban, he does that. And I think that might be just a way of telling Ocon that you're not God and Almighty. Because somewhere he's been the constant of that team for 4 years.
That's what's angered Famin, I think, as well. The fact they nearly lost a chance where they could get points. And this was not like Miami where it was a bit unlikely. This is a circuit which doesn't favour power, doesn't favour anything like that. It's more the skill. And with Gasly P10, if they took each other out on lap 1, you know for well Aston Martin could pick up points. Maybe even Williams could have got a point or two. So yeah, exactly. It was clumsy. You can't even fit two scooters in that corner, let alone two massive F1 cars without causing an near airplane crash. So yeah, I think they are trying to say to him, look, you're out of contract. You want to play this game? You know the door. We've got plenty of reserves. We've got Jack. We can even stick or make Mick Schumacher in if we really like to. So yeah, I mean, he may have potentially made his bed and he has to lie in it. In that sense, and the fact that he probably has secured his exit.
Yeah.
Okay, I think secured your exit is such a nice way to frame it. But just securing our exits as well, I want to quickly know we are moving towards Canada, and that's a high power, low downforce circuit. Straight line speed matters. And what are your predictions going into Canada?
Ed first.
Oh God, I'm put on the pressure.
Harika is just securing her bases now.
I'm on the pressure cooker here. So I think Max will pull something out of the hat and will win, but Charles will run in close, and so will Lando. So that will be 1, 2, 3, Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris. I can see Aston Martin suddenly becoming good again and getting maybe one car into Q3. 2 if Stroll gets it right. But I also think we'll see no driver changes. I just have a feeling that it's more just a threat for Ocon rather than definitely you're going to have to watch a race from a yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean. So I expect them I expect Ocon and Gasly to be in the car for Sunday in Canada. Do I expect them to hit each other again? Yes. Turn 1 is very, very tight in Canada. And it just needs one or...
And I feel like you want them to hit each other now.
Well, I'm not a Netflix producer, so I'm not... I don't want it to happen. So maybe they'll hit each other. I don't know. I don't want to for the sake of that team.
This would be our application to Box, I feel. Yeah. Finish up your prediction.
And last prediction for me, I don't see Perez getting into Q2. I'm predicting a back of the grid start.
I'm predicting another Q1 knockout I'm sticking with Ed's prediction, Q1 knockout for Checo. Also, I feel Max told us that they'll be better than they were in Monaco, but this track is also bumpy. And it has a different asphalt, so I don't see Red Bull dominating either. Max will have enough, maybe, I feel, for a podium. But I think this will be one of those other tracks because if McLaren and Ferrari have a track where they can challenge the Bull, they seem to be coming out with all guns for that. And they have 2 drivers each to make that happen. If not a Lando, a Piastri. If not a Charles, a Carlos. And they have the most close driver pairings in Formula 1. So any track where Red Bull's even a 10th off, you're going to see that Ferrari and McLaren in that spot. And they also have drivers who are pulling out, who have a 1 race win confidence this year. Charles has had 1 win, Carlos has had 1 win. Piastri is yet to have his, but I think the confidence is up there. Like Piastri turned his performance slump around, where he's not beaten by his teammate for the 8th race in a row. So that's been a change. So you're going to have 4 very confident drivers going for it at max. And I think that track is also one of the tracks Red Bull have written off that are going to not suit them. So they're going to rely entirely on Verstappen and not the Red Bull. And in the midfield, I do see maybe, like he predicts, Gasly and Ocon clashing. Yeah, I think Montreal will throw up something that'll change the silly season or add a twist or two to the silly season too. I don't know where Carlos is going to end up on the in the charts, but I think we could see a serious shake-up. I don't see any drives getting confirmed. Maybe after Spain, maybe more around Silverstone, we'll hear a few headlines. I don't see much of that at the moment. But Montreal, yeah, that's another street-esque circuitish format. So I'd expect that to be McLaren and Ferrari favoring and not Red Bull favoring. So I do see those two cars go all guns out there.
You guys have used way too much logic, so I'm going to go out and say that Piastri is going to win the race, and
Yeah,
maybe
I
both
didn't want to
Alpines
jinx
will
the
be.
shoey. I didn't want to jinx
Good
the
shout.
shoey because I have this problem with Piastri and his bloody adoption now. Because if he keeps getting adopted by the Monegasques and the French, then he loses the right to the shoey. Now, Daniel Ricciardo gave me an interview and he said there will be liquids drunk out of shoes. Sadly, he was looking for an off podium there and it didn't work out for him. But I thought Piastri would make it happen, and Piastri also lost it because his shoey got jinxed. So I was trying not to say that towards the end of it.
There you go.
Yeah.
I have said it. I think Piastri is going to win it. Maybe Carlos might be on the.
You
on
might
the
just have an
second.
odd winner if Red Bull are on the back foot and they aren't able to figure out that problem, or if they say they're as clueless with the weakness of their car as they are, because that's something the other two will capitalize on. And Red Bull are bringing upgrades to Montreal or Spain, but so are Ferrari and so are McLaren.
Exactly. And I think McLaren have really, really outdone in terms of the pace of development, and I think they've got the right bits
They
on
have
the
the
car.
best rate of development on the grid when it comes to their car. They've strategically put things into their pipeline with what upgrade comes where, and also they've had the most wind tunnel time, more than Ferrari and Red Bull. So they have everything going for them. And I think even Vassir said it, and even Max said it, that this championship is wide open right now. And if it's going to be wide open, Max even suggested it could swing a bit till summer break or even beyond. So you might have a very interesting season unfolding in front of you. So we are saying Imola and Monaco are boring, but when the other tracks come in, we might be telling a different story.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. As ever, have a great Grand Prix weekend, and we will catch you after Canada.